for half an hour?
Yep. Yeah. Thereabouts. Yep.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Vitality Project tonight with myself, 𝗙𝗏_𝘁𝗏𝘀, and my dear friend, Michael Morar. It's great to see you, Michael.
Good to see you, Bob.
Yeah, right on. Right on. Yeah. Michael and I were teasing before we started tonight. There's never a lack of places that we go. I love that. And tonight, one place I'd like to go is to start with this topic, which is how to be more realistic about early recovery, which is kind of a catch-all for one of the misunderstandings in early recovery, Michael, and you know this from your own clinical experience. And I certainly know it from my own clinical experience and learn more in my own personal experience in early recovery, is that for me, there was some wish that I would, or I've had some assumption that if I just stop drinking and drugging, that all will be good or all will be well. And it wasn't. It wasn't. And I oftentimes talk about it. People will talk about this early phase of recovery, and we can talk about it or not tonight in terms of post-acute withdrawal syndrome, but pause. But I was upside down for about 9 months in early abstinent recovery. I didn't want to continue abstaining was one piece of it, but mood-wise and cognitively and also just energy-wise, I was very much affected by that. And one of the things that comes up, Michael, in conversations that I have with clients is that I'll ask them, have you been sober, like for a spell, for a period of time? Have you been sober and then had somebody, owing to the erratic nature of your thought processes or your emotions, ups and downs, have you had somebody indict you for being addicted? And every hand will raise in the room. Everyone that I know that's been in recovery from addiction of any severity has had that experience. And then I'll say, how'd that feel? And usually some variation on like shit follows from that. And then I say, what did you do or want to do? And every single person says, I either drank and used or wanted to, because it's so frustrating. And it's frustrating on both sides. But I want to just maybe tonight talk with you, Michael, about that early phase of addiction recovery, because I don't know that there's that much information out there. I can tell you, Michael, because it wasn't that long ago for me. I didn't know about it. I didn't know anything about this. It took, and I'd read about it, but it's like reading about it and experiencing it's two different things, as you well know. So that's our topic, Michael, and wherever we go with this will be a pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah, I read about the moon too, right?
And the finger pointing to the moon is certainly not the moon.
Right.
That's good.
Well, Bob, I think I know what you mean. So in other words, you were asking people as they're trying to traverse from one way of being in addiction to a different kind of life. And as they made that movement, people were maybe continuing to see them back here as they were moving. Is that what you mean?
Well, you just amplified it some. I got to back up for a second. I just kind of dived in. Michael is a dear friend of mine, and we've been through a lot together. Michael's a doctoral student in clinical psychology back in San Antonio, Texas. Is it Our Lady of the Lake?
Yes.
Did I get it right? Yeah, university. And so the questions that intrigue Michael and I cover a lot of bases, but we both come from a background in psychology. So I just want to introduce so people can know who you are a little bit more and appreciate your brilliance. So
thank you.
Is it because people have a hard time with the transition? And I'd like to go there. I'll tell you what I was thinking is that just symptomatically early in recovery, people do and say the darndest things, and the assumption is that's all going to go bye-bye. And I'm just thinking of just the physical kind of gravitational pull, that goes on in early recovery. But you bring up, I think, an issue that's actually more of interest to me and related to this, which is not only is there the fact that I'm erratic owing to my biology, my brain and body are healing themselves in real time, but what about the fact that I've been known as the addict in the room, and how that can shake up a family system or a workplace environment or you name it.
Or friends.
Absolutely. Yeah. All of that. So I'd like to go with that. Whatever grabs your interest, Michael, I'm game on.
Well, and I think those are not mutually exclusive. I mean, I actually did think that that's why I did want to clarify on your opening part. And so the part where people might feel like, I think you said they feel like shit or something like that, would be the then physically feeling terrible and not having the energy to participate in the recovery. And is that what you're talking about around the pause part of it?
I think I'll tell you, I have clients that I think are really committed to recovery and really participating. And then they wake up one morning and they feel depressed, or they have this roiling anxiety that just comes out of nowhere, or they have a night of nightmares, or they're fatigued and so on. And I think I want to say even most of the clients that I work with, and you have your own experience to reference, most of them weren't prepared for that. They don't have any idea what the hell is going on. It's like, I haven't used drugs for 6 months, Bob, and I still wake up sometimes depressed, or I'll be sitting there, all of a sudden I'll just get irritated and go off on somebody. What the hell's going on?
Yeah. Well, I recently had a client describing something around, first he described it as emptiness. So, in the early phases, at least for him, I think it was just don't do that, which is a really hard thing to do when it's anything, whether it's to stop doing any behavior or to just not do it. Is really hard. But what he was describing to me was he had been pulled back into it a couple of times with this emptiness feeling, and which he later then realized it was loneliness. And the loneliness, and also the physical feeling, like that he's just feeling less energy, just depressed overall, and how that made it really difficult for him, because for him it was marijuana, and marijuana had, so when he was lonely, that was his buddy. I mean, that was his, what helped to bring him out of loneliness. And he hadn't experienced it in a long time, because, if you're always with your buddy or with people, so let's just say in relationships, you don't feel loneliness. And so when all of a sudden then you do, as you're trying to change your relationship to that substance, it only makes sense that you might do battle with those same things. Like it at one point served some purpose, maybe in moderation, with maybe anxiety or depression or just relaxing, but over time and in a different moderation level, which would be non-moderation, started to create problems in his life, and he was trying to move away from that. And so I believe this is along the lines of the things.
I agree with you. I know that for me, in my 15 years of living dangerously,
that's
increasingly so. Yeah, it's shorter than some people. It was pretty damn long for me. And it was, what's that story about? If you put a frog in hot water and then heat it up gradually, it eventually will boil to death. That was me. I boiled to death after 15 years of being in increasingly warm water. I know that for me, Michael, I've done a lot of reflection on this over the years of, being in recovery. Loneliness was a huge piece for me. I think it was primary for me. I think people are wired differently, but my insecurity in my life, owing to just my life, I felt lonely. I felt lonely, and I could ease that with a drink, and then eventually added other drugs in there. That was a piece of it. There's another part, and so when I stopped indulging in those addictive behaviors, I was left with, like what you're saying, just this emptiness, this loneliness. Can definitely relate to that. There was another part of me that I love ecstatic experience. I just love joy, which doesn't have much to do with loneliness. I just freaking love rapture, and I've always been that way. I love that experience, the experience I've had with love, with music, with some spiritual experiences over the years, and in some ways all of those things have been spiritual for me. And what I found is I could amplify those. I could actually begin to kind of orchestrate those with substance, particularly some of the harsher substances that I indulged in. And so if you take that away, you want to talk about a yawning abyss. I mean, there's this absence of that. A aside from what's going on in my brain in terms of being completely, the pleasure response in my brain is completely flattened out. So everything is flatland. So I don't enjoy food that I like. I don't enjoy relationships like I used to. Don't enjoy music that's my favorite music. So there's that. And then I think also playing what you were saying is, well, there's another piece from me that doesn't have so much, it's related to loneliness. It's a separate piece. I think I was always kind of subclinically depressed, Michael. You know, if that's all you've ever been, it's hard to know that that's what you are. But I just heard a morning dove, woo-hoo, woo-hoo, this morning. I can remember being 8 years old and walking, we had this bill that we had to walk down to the bus stop. And I can remember hearing that bird that morning sing just exactly that song. And I can remember feeling this really deep sadness inside. And I felt that a lot growing up. I can remember being on the playground with other boys like you, and I loved sports, but I always felt like that other people were enjoying that more than I was, etc. So I think for me, there's that too. So there's loneliness, there is transportation to ecstatic states, and there's also whatever I was
I like
doing.
rapture. I like your rapture word.
Yeah,
Rapture.
yeah. I liked rapture more than depression. That's for sure. That's
well,
rapture.
no, well, I certainly like rapture, but I liked your description of that.
Yeah.
Well, and I think what comes up for me too, Bob, around that is that I found for me, and maybe even when it became really a problem, it seemed like most of the time I didn't have the problem with alcohol in the self-medication part, or, you know, for the depression or loneliness. It's almost like it got away from me the most is when, you know, because I guess it would go I think for the most part, actually went for me, the rapture part. And when things were good, I wanted to crank that shit up.
Oh,
you know?
Yeah, absolutely, man.
and so, but then what ends up happening, that's not sustainable. So then it ends up being used for the other things. And so really what got me in trouble more than anything else would be the rapture part of it.
Yeah. That's good. I like what you just said, that I'll reflect on this later for sure, is that my initial experience, especially with some of the really heavy duty stimulants, for me, it was cocaine and ecstasy. I mean, that was just pure rapture for me. And it wasn't that I was unacquainted. I remember going to see my therapist the Monday morning after I had done ecstasy for the first time on a Saturday night. And I told him, I said, people kept saying, dude, are you as fucked up as I am? And I told Dawn, my therapist, I said, I felt like that was more of who I am. I was more who I am than I ever had been before, but it didn't feel like it was a discrete other state. It was just like, I always valued that. You know, I've always had that experience around sex, drumming, a few things like that. You know, kind of mystical union in nature thing. You can think of that thing. And this was like that maxed out. It's like, holy cow, I didn't know it existed, you know, and that was the strong draw. And it's just like what you said. I remember the next day after the first time I took ecstasy, the next day, first of all, waking up the next morning, and I thought I'd known depression before. My God, I went off a dopamine and serotonin cliff of epic proportion. Really, this is what Kierkegaard was writing about when he wrote about the abyss. I mean, I just went right off of it. And by that night, the next night, it's embarrassing to admit, by the next night, I was actively seeing if I could find some more. I didn't succeed, which is probably a grace. So I didn't sustain it for 24 hours. You know, I didn't sustain it for 24 hours. And certainly revisited that particular substance any number of times. And for me, another stimulant, cocaine, countless times. And it was not sustainable. It was not sustainable. And so I haven't thought of it this way. I don't think that what it becomes is kind of a Band-Aid for other stuff, loneliness and depression. But what got me into it was the ecstatic. And even if I got a little bit of that, it got to where it was hardly accessible. You know, that, at least for me, the whole pleasure response, it's all tied into the addictive cycle. It got so flattened that I could take in a lot of substance. I could drink a lot, snort a lot, whatever like that. And it was pretty muted. It wasn't, I didn't experience anything. It sure as hell wasn't like those first few times, you know. So.
Well, yeah, that part really pissed me off because it made my 7th grade teachers, or they had some people come and give us a drug talk, you know, when you're like in junior high. And it made them write, you know, because they would describe how it'll bring you to a certain, and then you're just using it to get back to the normal level. Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's bullshit.
Yeah,
and then when I figured out they were right, I'm like, damn it.
Yeah.
They were right.
I spent 15 years trying to prove them wrong.
I mean, we gave it hell, Bob.
We did. Yeah. And I think because it, it ended up destroying so many things of value in my life, owing to the ill effects of addiction, that when I stopped it, I know that for me, thinking of tonight's topic, I was ill prepared, as was my partner, Colleen. We were both ill prepared for what was to come. It was like, whoa, hell hath no fury, like an addicted brain being left without just what we're talking about, without that rapture, without some kind of protective buffer against sadness and loneliness. I've never been so rageful in my life, and it characterized that time. It's really painful to me even now to think of it. Colleen and I've had to do a lot of healing over the last 10 years around that, because I was, and I remember it feeling good. It felt good to rage. It was like, it's crazy. It was egocentric for me to be an asshole. And I was in and out of that, more in than out of that, pretty strongly for the first few months. It took 9 months, and it's only marked by the fact that it coincides with my father's passing. And I've shared this with you before. I went to my father's funeral. I was asked to speak at his funeral, and I could feel, because I was with other family members, I could feel something substantively had changed. And Colleen couldn't come with me. I was by myself. And when I came back, it was after that. It's kind of a marker. That was a major event for me. I came back from that, and she says, Bobby's back. Bobby's back. And I felt that way. It coincided with my inner experience. And what that meant is that there was enough critical mass inside where I wasn't just going to fly off the handle every 5 seconds. I still did that. I still do that occasionally, but it's relatively rare. And it was reliable. You could set your clock to my rages. It was really horrible.
So when Colleen back, were you surprised she said it, or had you already thought about it, or
it's an odd thing, isn't it, in life, is that it wasn't like you and I talk about this in terms of binary, you know, thinking or organizing one's life. It wasn't like that. It was a gradual thing. But you do wake up one day and realize, gosh, I know how to do multiplication now. I can't pronounce it, but I know how to do it. Or for me, drumming all these years, I'll work on a problem sometimes for years. Literally, I mean, I spend years on a rhythmic koan, and then when it comes, and it's like it's been building, and then it's there. That was the sense of it. It was like, it was gradually sudden.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I wrote that in something recently. It was that gradually sudden thing is that, and it's also, I'm not a big fan of the whole aha moments in general, because those happen sometimes, but usually it's more of what you're talking about, is that there's lots of other steps you're taking up a ladder, and there might be some line of demarcation when you go over the wall, maybe not, but I think that it's all those. The only reason I like the aha moment thing, because it minimizes all those other steps that were taken up along the way. But nonetheless, though, I'm curious though. But nonetheless, when you came back, there still seemed to be some line there. Had you noticed it before Colleen had?
I think it took me being in a different environment, Michael. I went up there, and I think out of respect to family members, I want to have to kind of be purposefully vague, and I'm sorry about that. I had an opportunity up there that was it's what 𝗙𝗵𝘁𝗶𝘆 would call an adversarial experience, where it kind of draws a line in the sand. So it took me being in an environment where I could tell I'm no longer that. And it wouldn't have been evoked so clearly with such high relief with Colleen, but it was there. So it was something about that circumstance and some of the decisions I had to make in that circumstance that made it clear. It was kind of like snuck up on me. It's like, wow, I can do that. And it was like, and it was kind of like, I can do that with a sense of, I'm not sure the jack will go back in the box. I think I'll be able to do that from now on. You know how that goes. You puzzle over something, and then once you figured it out, you just never don't know how to do it. It's like that. It was like that for me, honestly. And I think it was certainly an accumulation, but the testing of it was that event for sure. Yeah. Does that make sense, Michael, what I'm saying?
It makes perfect sense. Yeah. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me that you navigated something in such a way that it told you something different about yourself than you had been experiencing.
Yeah. It took being in a different environment, for which I was grateful. You know, I was in neck deep in 12-step recovery and refuge recovery and all kinds of things. And it was going on the whole time. But it took being put in a situation that's radically different than what I was familiar with, and also kind of being put to the test. And there it was.
Yeah. Well, Bob, I'm curious about what your thoughts are on, because we proposed kind of a problem, so to speak. I'm wondering if we might talk a few minutes about what might help with these things.
I'm glad you asked that. That's really the kind of the centerpiece of this. Michael, from all of our conversations, and I feel like you're similarly committed. I just feel like our talking about it right now is kind of the medium is the message. The way that we're talking about it, this is completely unplanned. You and I are just talking. I'm talking from my heart. You are too. Is there a way that we can talk about the reality? What was the title of this? How to be more realistic about early recovery. I picked that word. Is there a way we can be real about, if I'm the individual in recovery from addiction, can I be real about, I don't know what the hell to expect, and I'm really sorry. I'm thinking of talking to loved ones. And if I'm the loved one of somebody in recovery, is there a way to have an understanding of what's going on in the brain and the body and the psyche that could, this is tricky to talk about because it's less the stance I was in. Is there a way to find flexibility and compassion for that individual? And I want to qualify that. I'm not sure it is going to be with the person in recovery. It's almost like Colleen went to other people for support because she couldn't rely on me, and we got educated. I mean, I was reading my ass off during that time, and I began to be able to articulate what was going on inside, but also to reflect it in what I understood about what happens in the brain for 6 months or a year easily, virtually with any severe addiction. And she was reading that stuff. I was sharing it with her. So it's just, is there a way to be real about it so that I wanted to be Mr. Perfect, or I wanted to be over it. Frankly, I think she wanted me to be that too. And it's not real. That's illusory. And so just some way to drop the conversation down to, I'm going through a rough time right now. And I think honestly for her, I'm picking Colleen, for our loved ones to be able to say, this fucking drives me crazy, man. Just to be able to be real about that rather than pretend or attach to something that's not even possible. I don't think it's possible to be out of the woods in early recovery. So is there a way for us to create, what would you call it?
Like a holding space, or
that's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah. A big enough container, a holding space that can contain all of this, which means we have to hold off. We have to hold, what's that phrase? Hold your horses. We have to hold our horses. We have to hold our, I thought of that a long time. We have to hold our horses because the horses we want to be on our way, and we're not going to be for a long time. I swear to God, I haven't thought of that phrase in a long time. I think I learned that in Texas.
Well, my mom's watching, and I'm sure she's going to love the hold your horses.
Hold your horses, Bobby.
well, and I think what you're saying too is important, because both the person that is wanting to, to progress in their recovery, as well as their family, maybe even more, wanting to see this person cross over this unknown place into this known, into this destination place.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there is this destination place exactly. It's more of this traversing place and finding some place along it that fits.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying. I'll say this from my own experience, Michael, is that as Colleen and I were able to come together over time, she experienced so much trauma around this, I mean, it's just, my God. And I traumatized myself and her. But as we were able to move over time, and this was a gradual evolution over the early years of my recovery from severe addiction. She became less and less reactive, and in the grace of her being less reactive, I could cry. I mean, it was so healing for me, for her to be with me and not have her look at me with a pained expression or worry, like a furrowed brow, or worse, some kind of judgment. And it could still happen early on, and it's a way of holding out for healing happening in some relationships. You mentioned your mom. I'm talking about my wife. Earlier, I mentioned support groups. I'm thinking of my daughter, Amanda. I'm thinking of friends. Angela's online with us right now. Angela's a dear friend we've been through a lot together over these years of recovery. Is there a way that we can create a holding space that is as patient as is required? There's a great poem by D.H. Lawrence, and it talks about this, and I can't go to the verse without doing the whole thing. So I have to do the whole thing so I can get to the verse. So bear with me.
Yeah.
He says, this is D.H. Lawrence's poem is called Healing. He says, I am not a mechanism, an assembly of various sections. And it is not because the mechanism is broken that I am ill. I am ill because of wounds to the soul, to the deep emotional self. And the wounds to the soul take a long, long time, long, difficult repentance. I'll just stop there because I can't remember the rest, and that's all I wanted to get to was that last part. But there's something about the fact that he says a long, long time. Oh, he says only time can help, and patience. Only time can help, and patience. It takes a long, long time to heal from this. And I can understand why people would be pissed off and looking at their watches and wanting to hurry up and stuff, but it takes a long, long time. And it's hard to ask this of our loved ones, but we've got to be patient with ourselves. You and I both know this firsthand. And we have to ask those that love us, can they please be patient with us as we very gradually get sudden.
Yeah. Well, and so I'll just share a little bit about, and this will be brief, because it seemed like what you're talking about is maybe the opposite of what I brought up earlier, that instead of someone seeing you back here as someone that was the addict in the room, I think is what you said, and that you were going to create problems. So that's kind of seeing you behind of where you're going. And 𝗙𝗏𝘁𝗶𝘁 talks about this in terms of seeing people one head of a head above where they are.
That's good. That's good.
Helps them step into that preferred self, or that where they want to go. And so in recovery, it's oftentimes, and that's why I don't like it when people get this essentialist idea about what addicts do, because that's what addicts do. And if we're expecting them to do that, then we're going to see them negatively and then be surprised when they perform negatively. And then we'll blame it on them and we'll say we were right. And if we're seeing people ahead of where they are, they're much more likely to perform that. And so the story I had, and this slightly pairs up with what I just said, is that I remember asking my parents very early on, I said, are you guys just waiting for because I felt like I was moving in a really good direction. And I needed in some way reassurance that they also saw me that way.
Yes.
And that they weren't seeing me behind. And so I said, are you all waiting for the other shoe to drop? Something like, because it's also, I'm not a huge fan of part of the saying of recovery's part. I mean, relapse is part of recovery. I appreciate the intent of that, but it also it can make it too easy to see people behind of where they are. And so my parents said, no, we're not waiting for the other shoe to drop. And quite honestly, it doesn't matter if they really believe that or not at the time. And I do think like that they wanted, I mean, I say that in a joking way because I can understand a family member having a hard, it's not that I fully expected them to go, oh no, absolutely. But I just needed some indication that they were seeing me ahead of, or at least where I saw myself going. And that if they, I don't think it would have changed the course of my life, but I don't know. I really don't. But I just know it would not have been good for me if they would have said, no, we're kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, I love your story, and I love that your parents gave you what Vygotsky is talking about. What's his term for it again?
There's not. I can't remember if he has a term for it, but it's kind of like through a more knowledgeable other that they're seeing you ahead of yourself. As you traverse the zone of proximal development. So.
Okay. Yeah. It reminds me of two things. I'll share them and we'll wind down in a second. One is Heinz Kohut, who I mentioned earlier, the psychoanalyst. This is the way that he talks about what he calls mirroring, and he means it in a very specific way, is that what gets mirrored is what he refers to as the ambitious sector in Michael, the ambitious part of Bob. So it's like where we're headed is that's mirroring is to be in the presence of somebody who, like Vygotsky, is seeing where you're headed, it seems like to me. And I like very much being introduced to his thought about that. It also reminds me of an essay I read years ago, and it was by Carl Jung. He wrote it in a book on mythology, and it's just a single line. I've been looking for this book. I gave my books away over the years, and I haven't tracked this quote down, but it's a beautiful quote in which he says, it's next to impossible for one's self, and he's using self almost in a spiritual sense. It's next to impossible for oneself to incarnate in the absence of being seen. Very similar to Vygotsky, very similar to Kohut, is that it requires at least one other. In your case, your mom and dad. In my case, I've been speaking of Colleen, somebody who can see us so that we can incarnate what they see in us. And if they see only loss and lack and one step back, it is very much a self-fulfilling prophecy, but the opposite is the case. And you know this, I mean, Kohut talked about this. He says, you can come from the most fucked up background imaginable, and if you even have one person, maybe it's an uncle or a coach or a minister, or who knows, or a partner, if you just have one person that mirrors your best self, your ambitious sector, as he calls it, that can be enough to weather the storm of horrible trauma. I mean, I'm really struck by that. It just takes one person. Some people, if you just have one person like that, it can save your ass. And so I think that's what we're talking about with your mom and dad. Thank you, Michael's mom and dad, bowing to you. And thank you, Colleen. And for all others who've been able to be patient and enduring. And I like the way that the word patience is translated in the New Testament. I think it's in the King James Version. The word patience is translated as long suffering. I've always thought like that was a perfect way to talk about that. Long suffering, no kidding.
Yeah. Well, and also, Bob, I think we're talking about a relational identity. Identity is not just an individual project. And really our identity is between myself and yourself. And so it's not just encapsulated into us, that really to be that, it has to exist with the other.
Yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful. I've cited him before in our conversations. When I was going to graduate school, I read every book I could get a hold of by the Jewish theologian Martin Buber. I loved his Tells of the Hasidim. He has volumes of stories, Hasidic stories that were very touching to me. But his classic book is I and Thou, and it's in that book that he says, God is the between. God is the between. And you could do worse than that for a definition of whatever you think of as being the transcendent dimension in our lives. And I really appreciate it. Ourselves are between. How does Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese scholar, he says, I love this. He says, it's not that we are, Michael, we enter our. We enter our. Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. We enter our.
Yeah, and it's, to me, the statement you said about the Jewish theologian, to me is almost exactly the same as this. To me, those things overlay on the relational identity piece that I brought up. To me, is that it's the space in between.
Yeah.
Maybe someone else like, I think therefore we are, and because we are, therefore I am.
Ooh, that's nice.
That's not mine. Let's see if I can say it again.
Yeah, that's nice.
Because I don't know. Let's see. I think therefore we are. That first part actually isn't wrong, but I'll just have to say it to get it going. All right. I think therefore we are, and because we are, therefore I am.
That's beautiful. If you track that down, I'd love you to send that to me. That's beautiful. I love that. It takes Descartes into the modern age. Excuse me, the postmodern age. Right, Michael, I got to scoot, and I want you to go. It's a couple hours later for you. I want to thank you for sharing this time. We'll be back in 2 weeks. I freaking love where we go every single time, Michael. It's a real, it's such a pleasure, such an honor.
Me too, Bob. Great talking to you, and thanks for including me in.
You have a good evening. We'll be in touch between now and then. I'll see you in a couple of weeks here. Okay. Thanks everybody for joining us. Bye-bye. Good night. Good night.